Hello, this is Lisa, your host of Unexplained America, and thank you so much for joining me this week for this episode. And today it's part one of the Green River Killer case. Now, listener discretion definitely for this episode. Most of our true crime episodes for sure, but this one is terrible. The Green River Killer did some very terrible things to his victims, so definitely listener discretion. Now, a little business. I'm very excited because there will be another live show in 2026. So, more details to come. This is just early planning stages, but yes, very excited. Also, definitely join the Patreon. The Patreon gets tons of bonus episodes. So there's so many to listen to. If you like Unexplained America and you want even more episodes, I just released Ed Gein, the true facts on Ed Gein for the Patreon. So go in the show notes, click on the Patreon, check that out. And also, I do have merchandise on the website. So go to unexplainedamerica.com and definitely email me. It's unexplainedamerica2@gmail. So please reach out to me if you have any content requests or any scary stories or anything that you want me to look at. Hope you all had a wonderful holiday, New Year's, everything. I'm back on my eating healthy journey, and last year it was successful, and now I'm rebooting after a very lax quarter of the year of eating just terrible. Absolutely terrible. So yes, but hope you guys had a great New Year's. This case, it is obviously serious. It is awful, horrible serial killer situation. This case absolutely captivated me, I guess, because when they were looking for this killer, I was a teenager, and it was one of those things where it was horrible. Women were disappearing and showing up, killed. So it was just absolutely horrible, mystifying. And then when they solved it, I was 21, and it was just a sense of relief. Wow, that this person is caught and that they knew finally who had killed all these poor young women. So, and it's, again, even though I knew about this case, I had watched things about this case back then. It's been a long time. It's probably been 20 years ago since I've visited this case, and some of it I had forgotten how pure evil this killer was. So, we're going to get started. And again, this is part one. So, on Friday, November 30th, 2001, 52-year-old Gary Ridgway is arrested by the Green River Killer Task Force, and this is composed of detectives with the King County Sheriff's Office in Washington State and the FBI. Now, Gary had evaded the sheriff's office for 20 years, but had been on their radar literally since 1984. So right away, he was on their radar. Now, Ridgway would be convicted as the infamous Green River Killer. Let's go to the very beginning. On Sunday, August 15th, 1982, King County Sheriff's homicide detective Dave Reichert was celebrating his daughter's birthday with his extended family when he got a call to go investigate a double homicide. 2 female victims were found on the Green River in a town named Kent, about 20 miles south of Seattle, Washington. Now, Kent at that time was pretty rural, only 25,000 people or so population-wise. Now it's more like 100,000 people. But this was an area where people could access the Green River along Fraker Road. Now, Dave had grown up on this river, and he had grown up in Kent. He was very familiar. In 1982, Dave is 31 years old, and he had been with the sheriff's department since 1971. And he was now in the homicide department. He had a wife and 3 kids, and I personally could really remember Dave in this case. He had done interviews before the Green River killer was captured and then after, and I just remember he came off so caring and kind and just seemed like the nicest. investigator cop ever. I don't know. Now, Dave was surprised by this call because there was two female victims, and he had just worked a homicide of a female victim 3 days before. So on August 12th, a worker at the slaughterhouse there that was located right by the river had glimpsed what he thought was a large animal carcass. He had kind of glimpsed it on a sandbar by the river. Now, as he got closer to examine the carcass, he found out that it was not an animal, but it was a human being. The body was nude. The body had on a ring, earrings, a tattoo that said Doobie inside a heart on her right shoulder. And she was kind of half in the water, half out. The parts of her body that were outside the river appeared to be burned by the sun, but then the parts of her body that were submerged were bloated by the water. Now, there was also evidence of egg-laying insects indicating the body had been there for, more than a day or so, definitely. Now, Dave himself photographed this scene on the 12th. The medical examiner thought that the body had been there for a couple weeks, and also that there was zero water in the lungs, and there wasn't any significant wounds or trauma to the body. They would quickly identify this victim as Deborah Lynn Bonner. She was a 24-year-old that had been previously arrested for sex work, and this is why they could identify her so easy, because they had her fingerprints on file. Now, this is, again, reminder, 1982, the way of identifying bodies would be fingerprints, and then it would be dental records, that kind of thing. There would be like, if the person had known fractures or anything, tattoos, that kind of thing. Now, as Dave drove back to the river on August 15th, all he could think about was Deborah's mother, Shirley, who had tears flowing to find out that what happened to her child. And now he was going back to the river for more victims. Now, a man named Robert Ainsworth had found the two bodies on August 15th. So he was a rafter, but he was also a collector. So he was always out scouring the river. He was always out there on the river. He came upon the bodies, and they were pinned to the river bottom. And they thought, the first thought in his head were they were mannequins. I mean, that was just the first thought. Now, Robert will tell Dave later on, before he saw the women pinned in the river, before he found the bodies, he did see one man. He had actually talked to a man on the river. They had had a conversation about a motor boat or something. And then he did see another man, not in the river, but in a pickup truck on the actual road above the river, like on Frager Road. Dave, again, he goes and works the crime scene. So he is taking photos. He is logging each picture with info, like time, location, all the details about the picture. Now, the first body was lying face down, nude, in about 3 feet of water. She was weighted down by rocks. The rocks were on her feet, the back of her knees, her buttocks, and shoulder. So that was what was keeping her pinned. Now, another officer, a woman named Sue Peters, she was assisting Dave. The other body was 10 feet upstream from this body. She was lying face up. And she was also naked, except for she had like a bra on, but it was open to the front. She was also being weighted down with rocks, and her eyes and mouth were open and her arms were loose. So in the water, it appeared like she was waving or calling for help. It was just very eerie. Now, immediately, Dave wondered and connected these women. Okay, do they have a connection to Deborah? Dave and the other officers work the entire scene. They are collecting trash, like cans that people have discarded, cigarette butts, like anything that could be linked to a killer. They're just having to get everything. And working these outdoor spots was one of the hardest and just toughest situations as far as trying to solve a crime or work a crime scene, as opposed to a crime scene being indoors, which the evidence would be contained, and, just the location of the homicide would be clues. But this being outdoors was just made things quite difficult. And as they're working this crime scene, they are noticing there are 0 items left behind to identify these 2 women. Now, this is August. It's around a river, and you can imagine the amount of just vegetation, brush. It was very thick with brush on each side of the river. As Dave is working the scene, he actually comes upon a 3rd body. It is a young female African-American woman, and she is lying face down with only a white bra on, and there's blue pants, but these pants are tied around her neck. Now, she is not in the river. She is along the river in the brush. So now he's got 3 victims, like all in one day. And then you have the one victim just 3 days before, all in the same location. And this is not feeling good. So now they're working this 3rd scene, this 3rd body. They're taking photographs, they work around, they collect all the trash, and then divers come along. They have to get divers in to bring in the other 2 victims, the first 2 victims that were in the water. And both victims, of course, being in the water, they were bloated and they were starting to decompose. Now, the medical examiner, he is a Donald Rea, Dr. Donald Rea. Little info on Dr. Ray. He completed his undergrad at Notre Dame, and after all of his schooling, he actually went into the Air Force and worked in pathology in the Air Force. Now, after he retired, he then came to Seattle and he joined the medical examiner's office and became the chief medical examiner in 1975. And he remained there until he retired in 1999, and he actually just passed away in 2018. And it looks like that was just right behind his wife that he had been married to for many years. So Dr. Ray is working the body. He determines that both river bodies were also young African American women. He said one body was only in the water maybe 3 or 4 days. Now, this body did have a bruise on her arm, but the other body had been in a week and didn't show any outward signs of trauma. Now, the body in the grass actually still had rigor mortis. That means, goodness, probably there 24 hours. This would be a fresh body, okay? Now, this body in the grass did have cuts and scrapes and actually had petechia. So I know you guys have probably heard this. I know I have. This is typically signs of strangulation, just visible signs. Now, I always thought this petechia was signs like people's eyes, but this is actually can be little spots on the actual face. So it's just basically where blood vessels had popped. And so these can be spots on the skin, spots on the face, and also in the eyes. So the team are collecting, again, just everything they can. They also collect the rocks used to weigh down the 2 victims in the river. Okay. So there are 4 bodies between these 3 days or so. 3, these fresh bodies are unidentified. This is really the big issue, like to get their identity. Also, Dave he's trying to be like, okay, are these bodies connected to the body found 3 days ago on August 12th? But also, he is remembering, okay, I have a victim, a Leanne Wilcox. So she was found in the Green River in January of 1982. So this is August, okay, so 8 months before. And then also he had a Wendy Cofield who was, in the Green River in July of 1982. So just a month. The linking and all these women and, the way that they were killed and dumped at the Green River, basically, like also what linked them or appear to link them was all the women were engaged in sex work. So this is the link with all 6 of these victims. This situation, this multiple victims, is nothing new to King County. Sadly, they were very, very familiar with serial killer. Unfortunately, they had hunted down another murderer that was killing young women in 1974, a very famous one named Ted Bundy. So at this time, in 1982, Ted Bundy is very well alive. He is in prison in Florida, but he is very much still on the minds of these detectives and the police enforcement, the state, but he's just a huge presence in the news across the board. So as far as starting examining these investigations, Dave starts looking at Deborah because he's looking at what are the links here. So Deborah does have a pimp named Carlton Marshall who had actually called her parents about 3 weeks before she was found, and he told them she was missing. Luckily for the investigators, the press hadn't shown up on Sunday the 15th as they were finding these victims. Like typically the press will have their radios out and they will show up, but luckily they did not. But the department did have to immediately tell the press that they found 3 bodies in the Green River. And, this was Sunday. So by the 16th, this was front page news immediately, oh my goodness, what is happening type of thing. Also on Monday the 16th, Dr. Ray is conducting the 3 autopsies. So he finds that all 3 died of asphyxiation. 2 of the female had semen, and the 2 bodies in the river had fist-sized rocks inserted into their vaginas. Yes. Now, this fact would be kept out of the press for numerous reasons, but they really needed to keep quiet on certain details like this that only the killer would know. So this was one of those details. Now, the victim in the grass, that had probably only been there for 24 hours, she had tiny microscopic glass beads on her body. And this will be very important. Now, we discussed how difficult it was to solve a homicide for them when it was outdoors, but this also, on top of it, appeared to be stranger to stranger. So it appeared that these women weren't linked to their killer. So this posed a whole nother level of difficulty in trying to solve this crime. Now, the sheriff at the time in 1982, his name is Bernard Winkowski. He was there in the department. He was dealing with the Bundy cases, and completely fearing that this was another situation, he decides to immediately form a task force of 25 or so detectives. So immediately there is a Green River task force, put in place. And of course, Dave is like, when you're called out, he was on call. He's the homicide detective. So these cases are his cases, but he is not leading the task force. There are supervisors, but he is the lead on the actual case files. Now, the task force, of course, their first attention, like we discussed, was identifying the 3 women. And this would happen fairly quickly. But the first thing that they wanted to do, they're looking at missing persons reports. They're checking with the other local agencies around the county and adjoining counties. And of course, this takes a beat. This is not, they don't have like computer systems like they do now. So they were trying to see if the women that they had matched any of the missing persons reports filed anywhere. They were also, of course, checking the fingerprints of women who had been arrested for any crimes. Like, that's how they had found Deborah's identity. So they're working on this right away. Now, likewise, of course, they had to announce to the public what's going on. And so they're asking the public to help identify these women. So they are putting that out. Now, they are getting a lot of phone calls, as you can imagine, and they're getting some tips. Some women are actually calling in their husbands or ex-husbands as the killer on these crimes. So they're working all angles here. They're having to kind of sift through all these leads and all this traffic kind of coming in on this. In this area at the time, so of course this is, King County is a huge county. We'll kind of talk about that, but it is in Washington State. It's very close to Seattle. Seattle, of course, has a huge population at that time. And like I said, this area of the Green River where Dave actually grew up, this Kent, is very small, 25,000 people. So it's like when you get out of the city, it was pretty rural back then in this area. But in this area, kind of running between Kent and then Seattle, there is a Pacific Highway, and it's running to industrial areas, and it's also running into the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. They call it SeaTac. And so they call this Pacific Highway the Strip. Okay. And there's 30,000 people traveling this highway per day at this time. And this was a hotbed for sex workers. So it was the airport traffic, industrial traffic, there was just women on the streets and a lot of men seeking women and just a lot of traffic going on. And the airport, like once the airport came in, they had actually taken on, that you can't live within a certain radius of the airport for safety reasons. So there were a lot of like abandoned buildings and neighborhoods around the airport. So there were many relocated people and just a lot of empty, secluded spots for the sex work to go on as well. Okay. And again, this is 1982. You just had a lot of people. You had very little staff. You didn't have enough sheriff's people that could keep this area cleaned up at this time. Again, this is King County is the 12th largest county in America. So it's a very big county. And people, you also had crack cocaine going on. So you had the sex work, crack cocaine, addiction. In 1982, there wasn't a lot known about AIDS or HIV. And obviously, this is way before people could solicit on Craigslist or things. So basically, 2004 on, the strip is clear because all of this activity kind of went digital, if you will. Okay, it went behind closed doors. But in 1982, the only way to solicit was literally being out there soliciting. Okay, so that was what was going on. There is another detective on the task force that becomes very infamous with working the Green River Killer, and her name is Detective Faye Brooks. So she actually had been with the King County Sheriff's Office, and she had actually worked in the sex crimes department. And so she was a huge asset to Dave and the task force. And again, she becomes synonymous with the case, but because she worked the sex crimes and because she was just really good at her job, she had a lot of empathy, and the ladies on the strip, they knew her, they trusted her, and so Faye could actually talk to these women. So right away, Faye is connecting with these ladies. She's trying to get information, but she is also trying to get the word out to these ladies to be safe, that there is a killer on the loose. These girls aren't just missing, but they are getting killed. And so Faye is a huge asset. There's so much going on. Literally very shortly, on the 16th, right there that week, the team does get a hit on some fingerprints of one of the victims. So one of the victims had been arrested before and had used several different aliases, but her official legal name was Marcia Faye Chapman. Now, on the street or on the strip, she was called Tiny. She was a tiny, petite woman, and she was 31 years old, and she was a mother of 3. Now, she did work the strip. Her mother had actually had the kids, and Marcia hadn't been seen since July, and her mom had reported her missing on August 2nd. So Marcia was the body that had been in the longest in the water. Now, the team didn't get hits on the other 2 victims, so they immediately sent their info to the FBI and again to all the other agencies there in the Northwest. And again, they're asking the press, the newspapers for help identifying these women. Now, families were coming forward that had missing women. So one family came in, and this helped to identify another one of the victims. Now, she is Cynthia Hines. She is 17 years old. This is heartbreaking. She had been working the strip. Her family was kind of aware, but kind of in denial as far as that goes. Now, she is identified. Now we have 2 identified. Now, after interviewing about 150 different leads and following numerous tips, dental records came forward and confirmed the final identity of the final victim as 16-year-old Opal Mills. Her poor parents were like the Hines. They did not want to believe their daughter was working this strip. and likewise were absolutely devastated to find out that their girl was not just missing, but dead, one of the victims. Upon investigating kind of further into Opal's background, because of course the police are talking to everyone, they're trying to find some connection, like they're having to look at these victims and look deeply at them to see if there's anybody in their background connected, okay? So that's what they're doing here. But they do find out that Opal had been working the strip. She was just an angry, streetwise teen. She had a temper. She had actually gone to school with one of the other victims, the Wendy Cofield, so they had known each other. Now, investigators are seeing again this connection of the women. So it's like the connection is the sex work and the strip. And then they also had found records that Opal had made a phone call from one of the pay phones on the strip. So this was within a few weeks of the bodies being discovered. And that was kind of the last time anyone made contact with her. This, at least, the three are identified, which is helpful, but so sad for these families. Now, a rumor does pop up on the street that Deborah had been killed possibly in a pimp war. So this was kind of street talk. So the investigators are looking at this angle. They're looking at all the pimps. That Carlton Marshall, they're looking very closely at him. And what they're finding is that, yes, the pimps were kind of rough with the girls, but they ultimately tried to keep the girls safe. They wanted to keep the girls working because obviously that ultimately made them money. So they did try to take care of their assets, so to speak, which is, it's all disgusting. But yes, they do clear the pimp war talk and the Carlton Marshall guy. Now, as the task force is working, the sheriff and some of the higher ups in the state, so they have, a little something in their back pocket that they want to utilize. So they do have a former King County detective who is now pretty famous. He had made a pretty big name for himself. It's a Robert Bob Keppel. So, little side note on Keppel, he did write numerous books about the different serial killers, Bundy and such. He wrote one, I believe, on the Green River Killer. In fact, he was a professor, and he actually passed away in 2021. But Bob had worked the Bundy case. He had helped solve it, and he had been asked to go to Atlanta and help solve the child murder cases there in 1981. So he was very good at his job. He was good at profiling killers and finding killers. So they bring him in. He is now working as the chief investigator in the Washington State Attorney General's office. And so they asked him to assist the task force on profiling and looking at these cases with them. Bob takes a look. He says the Green River linked cases to him appear to be Wendy Cofield, Deborah Bonner, Opal Mills, Marcia Chapman. So basically not Leanne Wilcox. He doesn't believe that she's in this grouping, okay? He said basically the killer asphyxiated, some with ligatures. He is dumping the bodies. He's sexually degrading the bodies, leaving them naked. He's utilizing the rocks to weigh down and insert. And he said the suspect was brutal, obsessed, likely to expand his range, and wouldn't stop. Now, some of the detectives on the task force, they don't believe that any of these are linked. I mean, they're working these cases. Dave himself kind of didn't want to see the links. He really didn't want there to be this, serial killer on the loose, but he could see all the links. And of course, we talked about the sex work, but these women were very petite. So it's like these women were being chosen for their stature as well, okay? Now, all of the detectives, they do concede that yes, if this killer had killed all the ladies, then yes, he's definitely going to continue. And obviously he liked the Green River area, but there was also Bob mentioned, is there something baptismal about the Green River Killer, cleansing, so-called? He thinks he's cleansing this woman in the river, or is he simply just trying to erase evidence by placing the women in the river? So The team, regardless of, the why, they decide that they need to stake out this area for sure. So they believe that he either will come back again, or even if he's just revisiting these places where he has dumped bodies, either way. So they begin to stake out the area between Peck Bridge and the West Valley Highway that's running along this river frontage, okay? So the officers are making notes on vehicles that pass in the area. They're writing down the make, models, license numbers, all of these things. Now, unfortunately, at this time, the press is still very hot for stories. They're very closely watching all this. And so they actually disclose to the public in, releases that they're seeing these unmarked cars on, doing surveillance. So this causes great difficulty for the task force as far as like their surveillance of the Green River area. On top of not just Bob Keppel helping, but famous FBI Special Agent John Douglas, who's with the Behavioral Science Unit there at Quantico, so he gives a profile on the killer. So he states the killer is meticulous because of weighing down the women, but also shows impulsiveness, like the killer doesn't always have tools on hand, so he literally improvised ligature items like the pants. So that showed him being impulsive. Now, the killer, he believes, is an avid outdoorsman, maybe a fisherman, has serious sexual problems, hates sex workers, has trouble holding a job or getting close to people, and is also possibly drawn into the investigation, like will try to insert himself or help. Now, the task force focuses on really talking to the present sex workers on the strip for any ideas, tips, leads. So that's where they're going to. Now, leads connect them to a missing person case. So there is a missing 17-year-old named Gazelle Lavorne. Now, the investigators go talk to a James Tyndall, who is a taxi driver on the strip. Other people on the strip had led them to James, who I guess was kind of seeing Gazelle at this time. And Gazelle is 5 feet tall. She is a young, tiny woman, and she was working the strip. Now, they find out that she has a tattoo of a bird on her breast and a ring shaped like a snake. So they're just trying to get information about her. Now, this Tyndall man, he had been close to Gazelle, and he was the one that reported her missing. The task force does follow up other tips that take them to talk to a former police officer named Tonto. He turns out to be Deborah's pimp, so they were able to clear him as a killer. So they are looking at everything and getting tons of tips and tons of people that they're looking at, and these are some specific people. But they do have another suspect arise, and one that they look very closely at and very long at. Now, he is also driving a taxi on the strip. He seemed to know many of the victims and be connected, and he kind of, at first interview, had kind of lied about his connections with some of the girls. But his name is Melvin Foster. So street kids had led the detectives to him, and they had called him quote unquote weird. Melvin points the finger actually at another guy named Dan Smith, who they do interview, polygraph, and clear. They actually go along the lines of finding out where he is, work, all of that. Now, when they dive deeper into Foster, they find out he's been in trouble in the past. He's been arrested for auto theft. He couldn't hold a job. He had 4 failed marriages, and all with women who were teenagers at the time that he married them. So he liked young women. He did frequent the strip. He confessed to that. And then he had known, where the sex workers worked, their spots. He would frequent these areas. And he was actually very cooperative. He does offer a polygraph. Now, the FBI, whenever they talk to Dave, like Dave consults the FBI before he polygraphs Foster. So they tell him to pretend in the interview to have a lot of evidence on him and see if he'll, confess. Now, they bring Foster in. He doesn't confess. He fails a polygraph, however, and they tell him he fails, and then he offers for them to search his house and car. So they do set up these searches. Okay, they go ahead and get, search warrants in place. Now, under interrogation, Foster does state he knew Deborah and some of the other victims. He also confesses that he would have sex with underage women, but that he refused to have sex with anyone under the age of 15. They do the search of his home, and he actually lives with his dad. So they go to the home, his dad's there, he has his son living there, like a small young son, and the home is clear. The son actually the whole time is there, like voice recording the search and participating with the officers. So that was interesting. They don't have anything to hold Foster on, but they're still feeling like this guy is just something in Dave just is like, this guy is it. So they do arrest him and hold him on traffic violations, so at least for the night. Now they get Faye to come in and interrogate Foster, and actually loses it on her, like completely loses control. But he does cooperate as far as he gives his hair sample, he gives a blood sample, and he is adamant about his innocence. So he just tells them, you got the wrong person. All of this going on has literally transpired by September of 1982. So all of this is working very fast. I mean, this is a team of 25 detectives working overtime. They're working double shifts, and they're doing everything they can to find this killer. They do have to release Foster, but they put him on surveillance, okay? Now, right at this time, another body is found. So there, on September 27th of 1982, a biker is biking, and he smells like a horrible smell, and he finds a decomposing body, and it's in underbrush, which is, he's a little bit south of that SeaTac airport area, okay? So kind of in that area of the strip, and all of this would be very, very close-ish to the Green River, but not in that same area where these other bodies were dumped, okay? This area is called the Port of Seattle. They call in the task force. Now, the body found is a young woman. She is nude, except she has men's socks knotted together and wrapped around her neck. Now, there is absolutely no other evidence, so identification is, extremely hard, but she does have a snake ring on and a bird tattoo on her chest. And then dental records will confirm she is the missing girl, the Giselle Lavorne. Again, this was September 27th, and they were literally interviewing, these people in August, and she had been missing since probably July. Now they go back and talk to James Tyndall, so they interview him. He passes a polygraph. Giselle's death does at least rekindle news coverage that had kind of died down. So, but the fact that their task force is very frustrated because, unlike with the Ted Bundy cases, the press kind of, it was like they were really hot and heavy, but then they had died down. But they feel like that because these women are sex workers, that they're not getting as much press as they should. So the community in general isn't rising up alarm. There aren't, marches or anything like that going on for these girls, unfortunately. But her death and finding this body on the 27th does reinvigorate the story in the news. Now, at this same time, again, there's still families coming forward that are looking for their loved ones. So there is a Mary Meehan, and then a Casey Ann Lee, a Terry Milligan, and a Debbie Estes. Debbie, she had been going by multiple aliases, and most of these women, that was kind of common for them in their work, but she was going by a Betty Jones. She had actually complained to some people about a man in a pickup truck, and he had a gun, and he forced her to perform oral sex. The police at the time didn't know that Debbie was Betty. Like, long story short, she was never seen again after this time. These families are very much coming forward, at least, with these missing women. But this is very concerning for the task force because now they had 6 bodies, the 7th body, and they have all these missing women. Like, what has happened to these women? By October, so this is just October 82, Melvin still high on the suspect list. He is very much being surveillanced. There is a John Hanks, so he is in California, and he pops up, but there was 0 evidence against him found, and basically they take his hair and blood samples, but he passes a polygraph, so he's kind of put to the side. Now, evidence against Foster is still 1, he failed the polygraph. 2, he said he didn't know the victims, then recanted and was proven to know them. 3, he had hair similar. He had hair similar to hairs found on the victims. 4, they were partially matched. He partially matched the FBI profile. 5, there were witnesses to link victims to him. And then 6, he did have possession of women's underwear and pornography in his vehicle. Now, he says the underwear were just left by people there, but yes, he did kind of fit what they were looking for. Now, by late November, the court, so again, Dave is like, he feels like Foster did it. So the courts give another warrant to search Foster's home again. So they do deep search his home. But also at this time, the task force is shut down. They put the task force in place in August, and now it's late November. And they're like, no. And this was not the sheriff's decision on this. So this team goes from 25 down to just Dave working these cases, okay? Just Dave. Now for Dave, so now Dave is solely working these cases, and his focus is still Foster. And Foster is still acting weird. He is calling the press. Like, he is always talking to the press. He actually goes on a TV show in that area called Town Meeting, and this happens in February of 83. He actually tries to call the F. Lee Bailey, the famous attorney, and go on his show. So he tells him he wants to take a polygraph on air. So he's really wanting attention. Now, there is a woman, so there is a Barbara Kubik Patton. So she is a private investigator, but she is also a self-proclaimed psychic, and she actually is, like, this whole time, she is talking to the police. She's coming forward. She's telling them about her dreams and such. She connects with Melvin, and then she conveys everything that Melvin says to Dave, okay? So she tells him that, in a conversation that he told her that the victims of the Green River Killer would have been so easy to control if their attacker had come at them from behind and twisted their arms, so causing so much pain so that they become submissive. Okay. This story, of course, catches Dave's attention, of course, and then also it gives a clue into Wendy Cofield's case. So she had also suffered a broken arm at the time of her death. So he's kind of notating this. Now, again, Barbara, the psychic, she was definitely involved. She was fixated on the Green River, and she was constantly in contact with Dave on that. So now, of course, Dave is having to work by himself, but there is a prosecutor, and Al Matthews is working with Dave. They're both trying to get some evidence, something, so that they can go after Melvin and arrest him, okay? But both of them conclude that there's just not enough solid evidence on Foster. And they do have items collected from Foster's home, and they send them off to the FBI, but they do come back with not matching anything, because one of the items that they had found were like the little tiny particles. So they were really hoping to see that these might have been the tiny particles on one of the victims, those little microscopic beads. And the FBI came back and stated, no, these do not match. Now, again, we do have a running list and something that they're really looking closely at of the missing women and girls who hadn't shown up. Some of them were seen getting into a pickup truck. Okay, so this was again that Casey Lee, a Terry Milligan, Mary Meehan. She was only 18. She was pregnant. Deborah Estes, a Denise Bush, a Shawanda Summers, a Shirley Sherrill, a Rebecca Marrero, a Colleen Brockman, an Alma Smith, and a Dolores Williams. Now, all of these women are young. I mean, Denise is 23. She's one of the oldest. Rebecca's 20, and the other ones are in their teens. I mean, it's just absolutely heartbreaking to have this list. But this list of missing women are really what they're focusing on. Like they're trying to be like, are these women part of the situation? Are there this many possible bodies out there? Like, what is going on? Now, finally, about a month of having to work alone, finally Dave is able to get at least one more detective. So he does ask Faye Brooks, and so they work together. And unfortunately, what Faye is finding out is that the women that are working the strip they think now, like Dave, that it's Foster, and so they're no longer concerned. Like, they just think it's Foster, he's under surveillance, this is going to quit, moving forward. So it's just kind of business as usual. Now, at this point, a new sheriff comes in. His name is Sheriff Vern Thomas. So he actually, is looking at the task force, and he wants Bob to come in and review the case and review what's gone on to give recommendations for moving forward. And of course, it really, wasn't even a task force because they dismantled it or whatever. But Vern Thomas is still wanting something resolved, taking a look at what should be happening on the case. Now, obviously, this hurts Dave's feeling. He, of course, wants these cases solved, and he's been working these cases nonstop. And so it's a point of frustration for him, but also just like, okay, I'm working my butt off here. But he is ultimately relieved to find out the recommendations. And bottom line, ultimately, Keppel is able to state to the sheriff that no serial murder case has been solved utilizing the abilities and time of one or two investigators. An immediate formation of the full-time Green River team of detectives is necessary. He had said many things about, focusing in too closely maybe on Foster and other things, but ultimately this assessment is good for Dave's team in getting him more help so that they can actually adequately work the case. Now, we had just gone over that list of missing women. So that list of missing women was literally as of like November of 82. So kind of the end of 82. By the spring of 83, there is a tip that comes in because 5 more missing women that go missing off the strip. Now, this is as of April of 1983. And 2 of these women are seen getting into an old pickup truck. One of the women, so she is actually being her boyfriend, a man named Bobby Woods, and her name is Marie Malvar, and she is a tiny woman. She's 5'2", 105 pounds, literally just 18 years old. Bobby, I guess, is like her boyfriend / pimp, and so he is watching over her as she works, and so they are aware of what has been going on, and so he is very nervous. So on the night of April 30th of 1983, he actually sees her, get into a truck. The truck pulls over to her. She's talking to him. The truck is a dark color, kind of has primer spots where repairs have been made to the body of the truck. So it's just a pickup truck that's just kind of, like older or whatever. Now, Marie gets into the truck, and the driver pulls out of the lot and is heading north. Well, Bobby decides to follow this truck. And so he actually pulls up beside the truck and he gets like a good look at the man. The man is just a white man in his 30s, and this man appears to be arguing with Marie. Now, they travel about 5 blocks. He pulls into a hotel parking lot. Bobby is still following behind, okay? Now, the truck leaves the parking lot and then is going south. He felt like Bobby was telling him, so this becomes a full-on high-speed chase, and Bobby's trying to follow him, and they accelerate, and then they get on the Pacific Highway. Bobby's trying to keep up with him, and then at an intersection, the truck makes just a quick left turn, and he runs a red light, and then he's off, and Bobby cannot find him. So Bobby is super anxious. He's fearful. Several hours pass, and Marie, he hasn't heard from her. There's no contact. This Bobby thinks about calling the police, but he's reluctant to get the police involved because what they're doing is illegal or whatever. He doesn't do that. Well, Bobby finally goes to file a missing persons report on Marie, and so he goes, like, this little community is called Des Moines. It's about 5 miles from Kent, by the way, so it's all in this area. But he goes to this Des Moines police station to file a missing persons case on her. Now, after this happened, Bobby went to Marie's family, and they all love Marie. They're just totally, they're doing what any loved ones would do. So they actually go out. Marie's father, Joe, he gets her brother, James, and they are all going out looking for this old pickup truck around this street that he had turned, which was like 216th Street. So they are driving up and down every street in this area, okay? So they actually come upon like a cul-de-sac in this little suburban neighborhood, and they're looking at all these driveways, and they're looking, everywhere. And then they expand their search a little bit. They go a little farther east on 216, and they pass over an Interstate 5, and then they turn onto this military route, and it's very rural. It had gotten very rural. And then they come up to this little side road. It's called 32nd Place, and they take a right, and they're just driving around. They're just trying to find Marie, and they actually come upon a house that has a truck parked in the driveway. And it's just this little rundown little home with this old pickup truck. And this looks to be exactly the truck. And it was actually like a dark maroon colored truck. Now they contact Des Moines police department there about this. And of course, this seems very far-fetched to them. They're aware that Bobby doesn't have the best upstanding citizen, not really looking at them. But the cops do go ahead. They knock on the door of this house, and the house is answered by a Gary Ridgway. Like thousands and thousands of men in the area, he fits Wood's description of the man that he had seen with Marie. He was white, medium build, mid-30s. He confirmed that the truck was his, but that he had no idea what Woods was talking about. He had no idea who Marie was. He said that there was nobody in his house, and he hadn't picked up anyone on the strip the night of April 30th. Now, obviously, the Des Moines police, they might have heard of the Green River Killer, but they have no reason to have any connection. There's nothing to arise a connection of Gary Ridgway, okay, to them, or, this is just a notation that they have. This is just insane that this does happen. And we're talking, this was April, actually, of 1983. Now, the task force, they don't know anything about that, okay? So that is just something that happens, and they are still working closely on Melvin. And then they are also looking closely at Goodsell and her life and trying to talk to anyone and everyone associated with her. Now, in the second week of May, and this is 1983, so there were some people looking for wild mushrooms, and they came across a woman's body. They were in a rural area about 10 miles east of the airport and perhaps 1,000 yards kind of north of a very popular fishing stream called the Cedar River. Now, this woman is fully dressed, but she does have a paper bag over her head, and she does have a wine bottle placed on her body, and dead fish had been laid on her throat and breast, and there was ground sausage piled on her left hand. A driver's license found at the scene identifies her as Carol Ann Christensen. She is 21 years old, and she has an address that is near the strip area. Now, although she's the right age and she comes from the area, at first it was really hard for them to say whether she was a victim. Obviously, her body is left very differently, with all the weird, macabre decorations that, she was dressed. But the more that they looked at it, the more the differences kind of receded. So the medical examiner found that Carol was strangled with some she had actually been undressed and then redressed. And there were signs that the body had been in the water for a time, and then it was relocated to dry land. And doctors also recover semen from her body, from inside her body. And then there was a third, so this would be the third sample found on Green River victims. Now, whenever Dave spoke to the FBI profiler John Douglas about this, he mentioned that there could be staging done by this Green River killer. So just because of these differences, it didn't exclude the Green River killer, because he felt like the killer was aware of the investigation and he would be proud of his ability to so-called change things up. Now, on top of this body and Carol being found, there were two more missing persons, a Connie Noan and a Kelly McGinnis. Now, they were both working the strip. Connie was 20, Kelly was 18. So literally, this is now July of 1983. The body count is up to 8, and there's another 8 missing on top of the others that were missing, and the task force is recreated finally, so they add 4 more detectives. So that literally goes from just Dave and Faye working it to 6 total, people working it. By August of 1983, there is a ninth victim discovered and added to the Green River tally. So this body was found by a man. He was picking apples in an abandoned orchard on the north side of the SeaTac, so on the airport. This body had been there long enough to decompose so that all that was left were bones, teeth, and a gold chain, and some of the bones had been broken. They worked the scene very closely, but little could be found to suggest any type of identity, and the medical examiner was able to say it was a female aged 15 to 20, and none of the teeth matched any records supplied by the dentist of any of the current women that were missing. As much as this is horrible, this is pointing to an obvious fact to Dave that perhaps Foster's under surveillance. So more women, they're finding more bodies. Could it be Foster? That's a question in his mind. Now, on September 18th of 83, a skeleton lying face down in an area off Star Lake Road, which this is close to what was a new development at that time of large homes. This skeleton also, there was not any clear indication of any identity, and the teeth didn't match any on record from any of the currently missing women. 5 weeks after this, in October, so it's just like you had August, the skeleton, and then September. So 5 weeks later, they find another skeleton on the side of what was called an Auburn Black Diamond Road. This area was ground leading to a stream called Seuss Creek. The teeth did not match any of the missing women, and this area is about 25 miles from the strip. On October 27th, still 83, A young couple is picking apples and they find a skull, and this is south of the SeaTac airport. This is the 11th victim. This skull, they find out that the skull is attached to a decomposed body. They do find brown hair, which was visible, but absolutely no flesh left. Now, the body had been buried with rocks and debris and such. That's why the couple only found the skull. They do find, in the area of the skeleton, they find a pyramid-shaped rock that was in the area of the pelvis, which would have been where the vaginal canal would have been when there was flesh. So this really signified to the team and to the medical examiner that this could have definitely been the Green River Killer doing the same thing to this woman, except in this case, she was buried and they didn't find her until she was decomposed. When they are working this site, they find another body. It's a female, almost fully decomposed, covered with lots of trash and debris, just covered. Now, as awful as this is to find more victims, this one woman, the first victim in the orchard found, is able to be identified as the Shawanda Summers, who had been missing since October of 82. So at minimum, this was at least some type of answers for her family. Also, the body on Seuss Creek is identified as Yvonne Antosh. Now, she is a 21-year-old. She is from Canada, and she had been missing from the strip since May of 83. Now, very quickly, the two women found in the orchard, they are their names. So it is the Constance, the Connie Nowen, the 21-year-old that was missing since June of 83, and then a Kelly Ware, and she's a 22-year-old who had disappeared in July of 83. So they are at least able to identify these bodies found. Kind of a running tab by November 1st of 83, so this is literally only a little over a year later. There are 12 victims, 12 bodies, and 20 missing women. Now, by January of 84, the task force is increased again, this time to a full 35 detectives working full time. So, and the press coverage is increased as well. I mean, there's more bodies, there's more press coverage, there's just a lot more push to solve this thing, thank goodness. And Officer Frank Adamson and then Detective Faye Brooks, they are put in place to be the public information officers on the cases. So a strange letter is given to the Seattle Post-Intelligencer in February, and this is February of 84. It's sent to them in an envelope marked very important. It's tight. It has 0 spaces between the words, so the words are just like running together, but it basically says, why some in river, some above ground, some underground, ? Think changed his mo, and then out-of-state cop. Included in this letter were some references to facts that were not widely known about the wine bottle that was found with Carol Christensen, and then they mentioned the stone in the vagina. Yeah, this was very weird. They send the letter to the FBI for analysis, and the only fingerprints found were literally, there were like 4 different people at the newspaper that touched the letter, so it was their fingerprints. In the end, the FBI, they said that the letter was probably not from the killer, but they really couldn't decisively say or not. But that was just something really weird in February of 84. Now, on top of this weirdness going on, this case is being worked from every angle. Tips take Dave to Buffalo and Pennsylvania, but nothing really comes out of this trip. Now, one thing that happens in 1984 is about 400 people, they do get together. They organize an event called Take Back the Night, and they are advocating to find the Green River Killer. So this is the first time. So this is 1984. This is the first time that the community is becoming connected and doing something, or trying to do something for the Green River Killer, which there are participants of families involved, which Dave and them appreciate that the community is coming forward. They are working so hard. Of course, a lot of people can't see the work that they're doing, but they are working all hours, all the time, very deeply care about these women and what happened to them. The task force has compiled a list of hundreds of men, and they're looking at men that have been arrested for assaults, a solicitation, so the sex work. They are listing men, also compiling a list of men that have their fishing license and they drive pickup trucks. Okay, so they're looking now between February 14th of 84 and then April, there are 11 new bodies recovered. 11, guys. So 2 are found at this exit 38 on I-90. And both of these bodies are skeletons. Now, they are eventually identified as a Lisa Yates, a 19-year-old, and then a Delise Plaker, and she is 21. Now, in March, 4 bodies are found. So 3 are near the airport, and the 4th one is off a logging road about 30 miles from the strip. And this is an area called Enumclaw. This person, so this 4th victim on this logging road, she is identified as a Debbie Abernathy. Like, her driver's license had actually been turned in like 2 months before. In April, there is a search of the area on Star Lake Road, and this kind of near where they had found a body before. Well, they find a skull, and then they find the body located, and then they find 2 more sets of skeletons. So basically, they go back out to this area. They do find a 3rd set, and in this 3rd set, there is an actual skeleton of a large dog with the body of the human. Okay, so it's like a person and her dog. They do actually have a tracker with the U.S. Border Patrol who is very helpful. Now, he is named Joel Harden, so he comes in to kind of see, he comes out to this area where these bodies were found, and he is able to tell a whole lot more just about the steps because he is a tracker. So he states he can see there's regrowth of various plants crushed by footsteps, suggesting the prints were made about a year ago. The footprints are sure footsteps, indicated the man came in daylight and knew the terrain. The size 10 or 11 prints were made by the type of walking shoe worn by people who work on their feet, and the man appeared to walk in a purposeful, unhurried way. Yes, so it was very, very interesting for Dave to get this information off of this tracker. Later in April, 2 more bodies are found, one on a logging road off I-90, and this is found by a Weyerhaeuser employee. So they work for Weyerhaeuser. He finds a bone, and then the skull is actually found resting on a stump and looks purposefully placed in this area. This barber, remember the psychic / PI, she had actually come out to the site where they had found like this body, and they had chased her away. So she actually went close by, like she was walking out in the woods. Now she actually finds the second body, and it is under a sheet of plastic, and the body is decomposed but has long hair. And this body would be identified as a Tina Marie Thompson, who is a 22-year-old who was last seen on the strip in July of 83. So this is April of 84. This brings the total to 23 victims and just an endless list of missing women still. Just a list. Now, after the total is brought up to 23, now in the summer of 1984, now that this victims list is up to 23, the task force gets a grant to get all the information, because they have thousands and thousands of pages of information. They get the grant to computerize all this information. And of course, they have suspects emerging other than Foster. So Foster's kind of falling down the line as far as a suspect at this point. A detective named Randy Mullinax, he brings in a Gary Ridgway for questioning, and he brings Gary in May of 1984. This lead had actually come from a prostitute named Rebecca. She had been picked up on the strip actually in 82 and had mentioned that she was with a man who drove a maroon pickup truck. He drove her out to a secluded spot, and then he couldn't get an erection, and he started to hit her. And she fought him back. She escaped, luckily, and then he drove off. So she was super scared, so she didn't come forward, but she finally came forward with this experience, and then she was able to give the indication, because when she was in the truck, she was very, aware, and she saw his employee identification, and she saw that he worked for Kenworth Truck Manufacturing. A detective had his photo from Gary had been picked up before in a prostitution ring, and she was able to identify Gary as the man that she had seen. So upon actually questioning Gary, so he admits to the situation with Rebecca, and then Mullinax, of course, he isn't aware of the Des Moines Police Department, going to his house in 83. Like, he's not aware of the Marie Malvar case at all. Like, he's not aware. In this questioning in May of 1984, Gary Ridgway does pass a lie detector test. So they give him a test, he passes it. Later in 84, 2 more bodies are found. So this is like November of 1984. Now they have a victim count of 25. They have Detective Adamson, they have Faye Brooks, and they have Dave, and they do a news program called Somebody Out There Knows Something. And the TV station that does this, they actually put out $100,000 reward. So they go on and put out all the information. They're just trying to get leads. In December of 84, Dave and Bob actually go down to Florida to see Ted Bundy. Bundy had connected with Bob and mentioned that he was keeping a close eye on this and that he would talk to them. So they were following up. He had offered his help, so they go to see him. This is from Dave's recollection. He says Bundy was clearly jealous of the press, and Bundy called this killer the Riverman. Bundy had ideas, maybe some things that they could do. And Bundy actually mentioned having some sort of outdoor pornography or something, some sort of event that was going to show like pornographic kind of snuff films or something, and then in the area. And he said the police should have the event and then monitor all of the people that show up for this event. So that was one of Bundy's ideas. He didn't say anything new. He didn't have a clue who this guy was. He just kind of, according to Dave, bored and just looking for something to do in prison. In March of 1985, so that was December. So now fast forward to March, a teenager finds a body out on that Star Lake Road again. This time the body was a skeleton, and it looked like the skeleton had been there for a while. They really felt like the skeleton had been there. Perhaps they missed it in the other searches because of just thick vegetation. The Washington State labs were years behind on processing just all of these items that they had found in these cases, and it was just, they had a lack of a budget, just kind of the typical thing. Another skeletal body out at that Star Lake Road. Now, by 1985, the task force, they have literally logged in 20,000 pieces of information into their computer system. They do get wind, kind of in the same time frame, they get wind there are 2 sex workers killed in Portland, but the Portland police and sheriff's department, they're not sharing any information, and they're denying that the cases are connected at all. So Dave actually finds out that there are 2 Brazilian men that have been arrested for these 2 murders. So he has to get on the phone with Portland. They don't give him any information, so he has to go to his sheriff, who gets him access, and then he goes up to Portland to finally look at their files. So they find out that it is not their people at all, but they did finally look at that, and that was another thing that they're working in all of this big caseload of information. Now, right after this time frame, this is around the summer, there is a skull found in Washington County. So this is an adjoining county. It is on the Pacific Highway, and it's a place called a Starlight Motel. Now, Washington County, they do share dental records with the King County, and then the medical examiner is able to identify that the skull is Denise Bush. She was the one. She was 23 years old, and she was missing since 1982. A second skull found later is determined to be Shirley Sherrill, and she was an 18-year-old missing right after Denise. So now that these people, so the women went missing from Seattle, but their bodies are found in Portland. And so because of this crossing of the state lines, this paves the way for the FBI to not only come in as help in profiling or looking at information, but actually in a much bigger way than just the consulting, profiling, lab work that they had already been doing. So they had already been doing these things. And Alan Whitaker, who was a special agent out of the Seattle office, he comes into play. And he begins work in August of 85, go after two new suspects. Okay. Now, in 1985, there is a woman in Oregon. Her name is Helen. They don't use her real name. And she actually has an incident with a man. He was a taxi driver, raped her and tried to kill her. He leaves her for dead on the side of the street. And after stabbing her repeatedly, covering her with a drum, and just by the grace of God, she actually survives, and she is able to play dead, so he thinks she's dead. And then she's able to make it to the roadway where, she is able to stop an older couple that actually help her and get her to the hospital. Well, they don't know for sure. They follow, like Dave works with another officer, and they follow all kinds of leads around Oregon, trying to see if this, is a live victim of the Green River Killer. Ultimately, they follow so many leads, they never end up finding this monster of a man, but they ultimately believe that it was not the same guy, as far as it, because she did have a good description of this guy and such, so things didn't add up per se to it. They did follow that lead, and this was in 1985. In the ending months of 1985, the department heads, they want to justify the expense of the task force, really, and so they do call in another really famous investigator, a Pierce Brooks. Like, he was actually with the LAPD. He had been investigating since the 1950s, and he was basically the investigator on the Onion Fields case. So he was had just a huge history, huge knowledge. So he reviews everything in the file, and really profiling wise, he comes up with the same information that Keppel had, that Douglas had, but he also mentioned that there could be a very important thing about where the killer is dumping these bodies. Like, he really said you need to look at ownership of these lands. You need to look at, obviously, this man is an avid outdoors person. He's, these areas are steep. They've got vegetation. They're hard to traverse. So he really thought that they should really look at people who've been working jobs for a long time around the strip and around these places, and getting lists of all, like, these workers of these industries around, and then also looking at ownership of land too, because he felt like there was just some type of possible draw there. So, but everything else, but he did basically at least appease the higher ups about keeping the task force in place, and said that it was very important to do so. So now in December of 85, so there actually, a stolen car kind of turns up in an area, and so on retrieval of this stolen car, they find a human skull in this area called Auburn near the Star Lake Road area. And upon searching, they find another skull. So they find 2 skulls in this area. Now, in January of 1986, the FBI has their sights on a suspect on their list, okay? Because they're investigating too. So they have a 52-year-old construction worker who lives in the city of Riverton. Now, Riverton is about 12 miles from Kent, just to kind of give a reference there. Now, this person's name is Ernest W. McLean. He goes by Bill. He's an avid outdoorsman. He had been arrested in the 1960s for burglary. He had worked as a butcher like way back in his past. So the FBI is really closing in on this individual. They've been monitoring him. They've been watching him. They really feel like he is it. They are all gung-ho for this. And they have made Dave aware, although Dave and them are not involved necessarily in this arrest. They are involved, like they're included, of course. Dave is really not feeling McLean as a viable suspect, but the FBI does, and they decide that they are going to arrest Bill on February 6, 1986. They actually put Dave with an agent named Agnew, who also kind of felt like Dave, that he didn't feel like this guy was the guy. But they actually pick up Bill's wife, Faye, and they take her into custody, and they have a warrant to search her Toyota truck, and so they're with her. So they are interviewing her. They interview her from about 4:30 to 10:30 that night, and she never gives up any information. She never seems concerned. She's kind of like laughs at this. She's kind of like, what is this about? Talking about how she's got an appointment. She tells them her and her husband are always together. There are 0 unexcused absences on his payroll stubs because he always gives her his payroll stubs. Like she just laughs at the idea. Bill himself, he is interviewed for 5 hours by the FBI and passes their lie detector test. Now, the FBI had tried to keep his name out of the papers. However, when they went into his home, there were people all over the place. His neighbors were talking to the press about who he was. So his name is released they don't say that he's the suspect. They don't say everything about him, but his name is out there. After this situation, and the FBI was so sure of themselves that they literally had champagne ready, like they were ready to toast the arrest of McLean. So after this happens, kind of the press kind of makes fun of the task force. They kind of take a little hit in the newspapers and such. And then the FBI just backs off. Like they just completely back off after this incident. That was February of 86. Now, in May and June of 86, 2 sets of skeletons are found off I-90 near an area called The Bend. This brings the total number of victims to 36. 36 women. This is awful. Now, by August of this year, just because of politics and money situations, 40% of the task force was cut. And after the cut, the task force does turn back to its original, information. They have all of this, thousands of pieces of information on their computers and their suspect list. So they start to focus in on those again. And Gary Ridgway again emerges. He had said he knew one victim, which was a Kim Nelson. She had been missing since November 83. They had found a police report in 1982 in Seattle Port Authority that Gary was with a woman named Jennifer Coughlin, who was really AKA the Kelly McGinnis, who had been missing since 83 and had mentioned she had been in a pickup that they had. And during this time, they found the police, when they're investigating this incident, when they're looking at this incident, they find that Gary Ridgway was on a work strike during this time. So he definitely had time to do the killings in this time frame. And then also they're looking closer at Gary Ridgway, and they actually find the Des Moines PD report from the May of 1984. And so they're looking at all of this, and they're also going back over that polygraph that he quote unquote passed. And it turned out that they really didn't ask him pointed questions. Like certain questions were asked, certain pointed questions were not asked. And so he did pass the polygraph, but they felt like the real questions were not asked. So they begin surveying Gary Ridgway at this point. And they are actually able to post like a camera near his home, and they are watching the strip for him. Now they do get a lead that tracks them down to a woman named Paige. Knew this Kim. Remember this Kim Nelson? She had the run-in with a guy fitting Gary's description. They track her down to Las Vegas, and she describes again the situation. And the detective gives her 6 different men's photos to kind of see if she will pinpoint Gary, and she points to Gary as being the same man. Gary is under surveillance for starting in 1986 and in 1987. And what they find is that he is running those roads. He is running the roads up and down the strip, and he would also go to other areas that sex workers were working in an area called Rainier Avenue. Background checks and interviews with people that knew Gary Ridgway gave them even more reason to suspect him. So he was ex-military. He had been in the Navy. He lived and worked in the area around the SeaTac airport for decades. He had a penchant for unusual and rough kinds of sexual encounters. One of his ex-wives, so he kind of fits the profile of not being able to hold down a relationship, but one of his ex-wives said that he had taken her to a secluded spot in King County and wanted her to have sex in the woods, besides rivers, down in ravines, outdoor places. And then several of these places were actually near sites where bodies had been recovered. Now, this wasn't unusual for people in general. Some people had a penchant for wanting outdoor sex or whatever, but all of these items were kind of adding up. He was kind of looking more and more like the profile. They did look at his employment records, and likewise, there were dates and times and such when Gary would actually have been away from his job. And then also there were credit card receipts that showed that him like getting gas near areas of crime scenes where the killer would have been prowling. So a lot of indications were going off to support evidence for Gary. Okay, so he's looking really good. So the investigators at this time, they go ahead and get a judge to a warrant. So now they have a warrant, and then they're going to quietly give this warrant on April 8th. And now this is 1987. So they've been watching him again. They've been kind of watching him. So they do the search warrant. The warrant is for his car and home. They bring him in. They get his hair sample, his saliva sample, go over everything, just combing through every single thing that they could within his vehicle and home. Later on, they're going to actually find out that from Gary's brother, he has a brother, that before this search takes place, Gary had replaced all the carpet in his home. By the way, they don't know that at this time, but they're scouring this situation. They are closely watching Gary. They have this search. Now the search doesn't produce anything. They don't come back with anything definitive to tie him in. But again, later on they find out maybe why. And this is where I'm going to leave you guys. So stay tuned for part 2. This is a lot. This is heinous. This is literally, we're stopping in April of 1987. And again, Gary is not caught until 2001. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you so much for listening this week. Thank you so much for being just a part of the Unexplained team. So definitely go follow me on all of the social medias. You can join the Patreon. I am on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. So definitely go, and please like, subscribe, leave me a comment. Everything that you do helps the podcast. So I appreciate it. Stay tuned, and I hope you guys have a great week. Thanks. Bye.